So today I want to talk to you about methylation and the MTHFR gene mutation, why it's so important when it comes to mental and brain health. But before we get to that, we need to understand the role of the nerves and the way the nerves work. So if we look at a nerve itself, what we really have is an electrical transmission that comes down the nerve itself. Then we have a space where it joins onto another nerve to be transmitted again. And in that gap, what we really have is a chemical transmission from one nerve to the other. And this is really, really critical because this is where most of our antidepressants work and our anti-anxiety medication works at changing the rate of which that chemical transmission occurs or changing the rate of which it is eliminated. The good thing with this, we actually have a natural process to doing that within that mechanism itself. So inside these cells here, inside the genes themselves, we have this packed tight material. And these groups called methyl groups attach to this and kind of bind them up and don't allow them to express themselves. So what normally happens is when we produce our proteins from this area, they come out, they get secreted in here, and they remove all these neurotransmitters, all these chemicals, they remove them all out of that space, which decreases the transmission rate from the nerve itself. So the more this gets bundled up, the greater the influence is from the chemical transmission. So the big thing we see with this is this chemical CH3, which is methyl groups. These are the groups that bind up that protein and don't allow, bind up that genetic material and don't allow the proteins to be produced, that normally remove the chemicals or the neurotransmitters and neuromodulators out of that space. So the more of these things we produce, the higher the ability or the greater the ability of one nerve to communicate with each other, and therefore the more significant effect it has on kind of like antidepressant type effect it has on the brain. So how do we go about producing these things? This is a really important question. So when we look at our methylation pathways, this is a very simplified version of methylation. We have this protein called methionine, and when methionine gets converted to another substance called homocysteine, it produces our CH3 groups that we then use. There's a couple of different ways it can do that. There's one pathway here and one pathway there, and these two really use two important substances. One's called dimethylglycine, the other is called vitamin B3. And when we're talking about B3, we're not talking about niacin, which is your standard B3. What we're really talking about is nicotinamide, which is NADH, which is the human form of B3. So you actually need to transfer them across into this format. And DMG is kind of like a form of a glycine, which the spinal cord uses to calm down. And one of the richest sources of glycine is actually collagen. So when you get that gristle on meat, this is really what glycine is really found. That's the main area for it. Once that conversion takes place, the homocysteine needs to be converted back to methionine so the pathway can be used again. So it's recirculated over and over and over. If we don't get the conversion of homocysteine back to methionine very well, then the result is that we can't actually activate homocysteine production, which means we can't produce those critical elements that we need, those methyl groups. So there's a few different ways that we can assess this. So one of them is to get labs done for homocysteine, which is quite a common lab. You should be able to get them done through your GP or your local pathology centre. And it's a really, really important marker. So if homocysteine is elevated, it generally means that we're not pushing things through this pathway very effectively. And if we're not pushing things through this pathway very effectively, this can be one marker to say that you're what we call undermethylating. To undermethylate means to have a reduced number of CH3 molecules available, and that will basically impair the way this system works. One of the biggest causes of this is a lack of folate in the system, and we're not talking about folic acid, we're talking about the human form of folate, which is known as MTHF, or methotetrahydrofolate. MTHF is really, really critical, and it's actually produced from folate. Excuse me. So folate gets converted to MTHF via an enzyme known as the methotetrahydrofolate reductase, or MTHFR for short, gene, which codes for that. And if we have gene mutations, which are actually quite common in the MTHFR gene, it can slow down that conversion of folate to MTHF and really play havoc in this pathway. And this is why you see so many supplements now coming out, no longer having folic acid, but having either folinic acid or methotetrahydrofolate within it, basically to avoid this gene mutation and get this process running again. So this is one of the simple things that we see biochemically can really affect brain health in a lot of people, neural excitation, even seeing some effect on people with migraine and this as well. And it's all just basically because this system here, the conversion and reuptake of chemicals as they cross the synapse within the nervous system, is just not functioning at the right level. Anyway guys, if you want any more information on this or you have any questions with it, just post them up below. If you know you've got the MTHFR gene mutation and you're not really sure what to do about it, just post it up as well. Or even if you actually just even get an idea how many of you actually do have the gene mutation, just let me know. I'd be curious to see how many people do actually have this mutation, because it is actually quite common according to the literature, and it's very common from what we see here in those who are suffering with emotional disorders as well. Anyway guys, have a fantastic week. Just another quick way that we can see biochemistry affecting the brain. If you have any questions, post them up, and remember, it's all about adding life to your years. Catch you in the next vid. See you guys.